Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching today's Ag Forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. Well, if I take you back to early last week, we can see the extent of snow cover here across the United States, and about the only place that endured a lot of this cold weather without receiving any snow was this part of the northern plains getting into the southern Canadian prairie. And if I just show you this same map, but looking now, take a look at this. This is a lot of the snow that's melted under the very warm conditions that have come in after that record cold outbreak here. So I was watching some satellite data yesterday, and I just want to show you a quick loop here and we'll walk through this west to east. You can see pretty good snow cover here, especially in the Cascades in Washington, and also look at how well lined the Snake River Valley is here with snow. Pretty neat to see that. We're still watching for those deficits that are in the Sierra Nevada and California, but I'll show you in a few minutes that the precipitation patterns changing toward mid-March are still in the forecast models as possibly bringing in better precipitation mid-March to California. We were watching here the event that set up last night on the front range of the Rocky Mountains spreading snow. This is going to be a rough go of it this morning with the snow that came here into this section of Colorado. But you still see underneath the cloud here where the snow is here in parts of the Midwest and the upper Midwest through the Great Lakes states into the Northeast. But as I was watching this animation, something caught my attention here, and I want to zoom in on the southeast because it was a clear day from Alabama clear to Virginia, and if you notice at the end of that animation, you start to see a lot of, smoke from fires. And I am guessing this is from prescribed burns, but just interesting to be able to see that here on satellite. Now from there, I want to bring up a topic that I was asked about this yesterday, so let's dig into this. This is the forecast temperature anomalies for the month of March, and there's a lot of support from the teleconnections, both with the polar vortex retreating, the current position of the MJO, what's going on with La Nina, several things, including, of course, the position and strength of the jet stream. Well, we're favoring some cooler weather in the Intermountain West, all right, and broad warmth once you get really just to the east of the 100th meridian. Well, I should say that the likelihood of seeing above average temperatures more often than below average is high, okay? So the question was, all right, if we do go over into a warm March, is there any concern that this flips back into a cold April? And I certainly know why that question gets asked. Like, do you remember April of 2018? This is statewide minimum temperature ranks. Huge ridge across the West Coast, deep trough over the Great Lakes. And we had several locations here having their coldest Aprils since 1895 in April of 2018. And then we remember the massive flip in temperatures we had going into May, where some of those states went over to their warmest Mays on record. So we know that month to month temperature patterns can flip, and we also remember just last year, April 2020 was very cool for a broad sector of the United States. And if we think back on that, look at how slow the crop was to emerge here, especially in the eastern Corn Belt, getting into the MidSouth, into the Northeast as well. In fact, the whole Great Lakes Basin was in deficit between April 1st and May 16th with respect to the accumulation of GDUs, while the West was quite warm. And on top of that, don't forget that late frost we had that hit the eastern Corn Belt pretty hard at May 9th, 10, 11? Well, that's not shown here. This is what happened following that. This was May 1st through June 1st. And we're looking at cumulative downward solar flux. In other words, how much sunlight got down to the soil. And the crop didn't jump out of the ground very quickly here, despite the early plant in parts of the western Corn Belt due to a lack of sunshine. So we remember events where there's a lot of flip-flopping between one month to the next. So I just wanted to show you some analysis of this. So I'm going to pick out this region, midsection of the United States. I could have picked anywhere, but let's just focus on this particular region. And what I did was I went through and I picked out, look at this, April temperature anomalies. That's going to run your y-axis, and then March temperature anomalies. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to see if there's a correlation. So does one year's March match up with the same year's April? Now, if it looks like a shotgun blast with birdshot here, then you can clearly see that there isn't a strong correlation. In fact, the correlation is 0.21. Now, it's positive, meaning that there are more cases where a warm March leads to a warm April, but that is certainly not a slam dunk. And if you look at this, I kind of labeled the quadrants. How often was there a cold March and warm April? Warm March and warm April. Over here would be warm March, cold April, and down here would be cold March, cold April. So my point to tell you here is that as we think about the fact that we are going to see more often than not warmer conditions in the eastern half of the country through the month of March, there is nothing to say that just because of that, we're going to go over to a cold April. It takes other events taking place. Now, before I show you those, I'd like to at least walk you through what the temperature pattern is going to look like. Here's the high temperatures today and compared to normal. So you can see that cold air that is in place along the Front Range where we have snow this morning, and some cooler air moving into this part of the Cotton Belt and the Southern Plains down here in Texas. Now, as we play this forward, let's just see how temperatures change for the day on Friday, and then going from Friday into Saturday. Now, I got to be honest, I live right here in Champaign, Illinois, and I'm super excited about what this is going to bring. But look at the 70s, almost 80s down here across parts of the southeast. The cooler weather is tucked away back in the northwestern United States and along the northern tier. Now, let's go from there into Sunday and Monday. We do start to see that the pattern continues to favor less of a large deviation from normal than what we've seen as we begin the month of March. Now, from there, what I'd like to show you is the day 5 through 10 time period. And you notice that both models agree pretty well that the Canadian Prairie, slipping into the northern plains of the U.S., are going to favor some above average temperatures. This gets us out to March the 7th. And if we look from there all the way out to day 15, which takes us to March 12th, we see a lot of warmth really centered in both models from the northern plains coming out of the Canadian Prairie over into the Great Lakes states. In fact, the GFS is very aggressive with warm conditions all around the Great Lakes here. Now, thinking about that, I don't know if you all saw this week, but there was a video that was widely shared about the ice breakup just on Lakeshore Drive here in Chicago. Now, I didn't know who to initially give credit to this video, and then I found out. You can kind of see it up at the top here. This is from WGN, and I believe this is one of their tall towers, maybe on cameras on the Hancock building. But we see the ice breakup here, and I thought I'd just bring you up to speed on the ice situation in the Great Lakes. And currently we're sitting at about 31% coverage. And sometimes at the end of February, we're sitting over 50 to 55% coverage. So this would be below normal. But boy, did Lake Erie freeze rapidly on that cold air, as you can see here. So I wanted to keep you up to speed with what was going on with ice coverage across the lakes. Now, as we look out into April, let's at least get an idea what the models are saying, because the long-range European weeklies will capture all the way to April 9th at this point. And you see that they're hanging on to that similar pattern, with the coolest risks being in the Intermountain West. I actually even think this is too cool here, for example, in the Columbia Basin, just as an example. So warmer anomalies still in the forecast through early April. Now, is there support for this? Well, we have to ask ourselves, what does it take to get April to go over very cold in that same sector right here? So I went back and found all those cold Aprils here in the midsection of the United States, because if we look there, we can then extrapolate what the rest of the country is going to be like. And what it took was a pretty sizable ridge here in the Gulf of Alaska and another one right here, really between parts of the Hudson Bay and south of Greenland. And if we build in the heat in those areas, the cold air gets pulled right in between. Now, what do we have? It's a little different view here. But if you just kind of follow the flow of the atmosphere, there's a bit of a ridge that's happening here and a trough in the Gulf of Alaska. We still seem to see a bit of split flow across the west, but you see higher than normal heights in this area. And then there's a bit of a trough just south of Greenland. And the point here is to say that the models are being consistent, that the pattern is not favorable to just bring in sustained cold into April at this point. Now, if that changes, of course, I want to stay on top of it. But I look out here and I say, well, we've got a lot of warm water in place here. We still have our La Nina, which is trying to make a little bit of a resurgence. We're going to continue talking about this cold water here that butts up to the Baja and California, because that could be critical for the summer temperature and precipitation patterns. But I'll save that for later. And I just come back to this. I wanted to remind you that those features, like with what's going on in the tropics, first of all, the La Nina is not strongly correlated with April temperature patterns. That's what that's all I'm trying to illustrate with the map that's over there. Yes, it does favor, the above average temperature patterns, for a large part of the country with cooler in the northwest. But if the MJO is really going to pop out of phase 6, 7, and 8 and come in this direction, well, in spring, that's not the cold phases of the MJO. So we just start to see these things stacking up, and both the tropics and the extratropics, where the jet stream is, are all kind of pointing toward a similar story. And that's really what I wanted to tell you today about this. Now, let's watch that jet stream I keep talking about. Let's go right to Monday, March the 1st. And I want you to see what's happening from Hawaii through Mexico, going straight here to the northeast. If we continue to keep the flow pattern like that, splitting across the west is going to stay dry into the beginning of March. So if we go here from March 1st, Now to March 4th, about a week from now, we continue to see, well, you see the flow jumping around the west coast. So I don't expect precipitation patterns to be favorable across the west coast until we get past the first week of March. And where it's going to be wet is going to be in this area. Strongest winds there. That tells me there's a temperature gradient underneath that. That tells me there's likely a stationary boundary. You're going to see the precip totals I'll show you in a few moments. But as I mentioned, once we get out here after that time period, we start to see troughing happening in this area, stronger winds here, and things tend to back off on the east. Now let me show you what that means in terms of our precipitation patterns. First, it's time to start talking about thunderstorms. I think back to this start of the season. Maybe it was the first round was in, the end of January. We had some severe weather in the southeast. Well, the latest convective outlooks from the Storm Prediction Center is going to watch this region today, and it's going to watch here tomorrow. And if we look at the total precipitation through the next week, this is from the European model, we can see that there's a broad area in through here that is going to see possibly in excess of an inch, and a region right in through here that could possibly be getting, in some locations, well over 2, 3, 4 plus inches of precip. We're drier in the northern plains. We're actually dry throughout much of the plains. We're drier in California, and as the split flow comes in, look at what it does to the northwest. Now, if we compare this all to normal, this is what the map looks like. So this is precipitation anomalies through the next week. And your eyes can quickly identify those regions that are going to see above average precip. Got clippers running through Canada, so we see the above, there'll be snow here. Northwest, button up against the Cascades, Northern Rockies, Blue Mountains, drier in California. Where the stationary boundary becomes established, this will be the region on which we're going to have the heaviest rain. But there could be a pretty quick drop-off or pretty clear drop-off on either side of this over toward drier conditions. So let's take a look at what's going on. First, this was last night, and what we're watching here, there's that snow I was mentioning coming down the front range. And as we play this forward, let's just kind of step through and see how things evolve. So through today, getting into midday today, let's now go into this evening. And then let's get into the overnight hours. We already start to see the first round of precip setting up in this area. Light snow in the Canadian Prairie, and you can still see the onshore flow running around this big ridge that's off the coast. See it just flowing in like this. Now as we go from, this is again midnight, into Friday morning, Friday afternoon and evening, we're going to watch this quite carefully in through this area for heavy rainfall. Now you start to notice that along the Appalachian Mountains, the models want to flip things over to snow right in through here. And that is going to be an extremely challenging forecast as to where that rain-snow boundary is going to be. But if we keep playing this forward, this is now into Saturday morning, getting into Saturday, now this is Saturday morning, We're going to watch through Tennessee and Kentucky, potentially for some heavier rainfall here. And you're just going to notice as I continue to play this, that's going to be the boundary right there. This is now Saturday evening, watching that same area as the first system exits the northeast. Going into Sunday, this is now Sunday morning and Sunday midday, and then getting into Sunday evening. That region again, we're watching for the heavier precip as we get some snow that moves through the Great Lakes area. Let's keep going now into next week. As we work our way into Monday morning, this is now Monday afternoon and evening, we start to see this region continuing to get more precipitation, although it slides a bit to the south on Monday, sparing, I think, parts of Missouri, Kentucky, Tennessee, northern Arkansas. But as we watch, going into next Tuesday and eventually into that midweek time frame, there is one thing I'm going to be watching carefully. It does appear that with this system coming through here, there's a pretty vigorous shortwave that'll drop a low right here, somewhere, pushing toward Louisville. And this could give us a setup for some strong storms that maybe even start in parts of Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, but start to move here on, next week over toward the southeast, as you see here. And then as we get out toward next week, this is next Wednesday and next Thursday, we almost see a repeat of that, you notice? And we start to see these stripes showing up in the European. That's the European model's view of potentially producing some, lines of thunderstorms. Now from here, I'm just going to play this to show you the variant. And what I want you to watch is what happens in the west. Because as I play this forward, we start to see that toward the end of the time period, this is now at the end of the first week, we see systems finally dipping far enough south to be impacting California. Now let's think about that as we finish this up. Snowfall over the next week, we could get some here across part of the northern plains coming into the Great Lakes. This will be the area that will be most challenging to forecast, and a lot of the snow is coming late in the forecast time period. We have our clippers running through Canada. We can also see the snowfall amounts in the Cascades and Northern Rockies here, but missing much of the Sierra Nevada. Now from there, let's now look at the probability of getting 1 inch through the next week. And here's the probability of getting 3 inches of snow through the next week. So just kind of put some perspective on the snowfall totals. Where I want to finish is this. As I look all the way out there to the end of that first week of March and the start of the second week, we notice that, as I mentioned, things start to calm down a bit here, and we start to see better precipitation chances coming in off the coast. As we then go over that time period of the 11th through the 18th, this is the time period I'm going to watch carefully for better precipitation chances for California. We could go back over to maybe a bit of an active Ohio River Valley storm track and possibly even seeing those jet stream winds pick up here, bringing in better precip into parts of the northern plains through the Great Lakes states. So we got a lot to be watching here, and this temperature pattern plus what we see in changes of precipitation are going to be critical to the start of this growing season. So we'll keep you updated, and I'll talk to you on Monday. Thanks.